Hello, everyone. This is Chrissy Scivicque, career coach and corporate trainer and founder of eatyourcareer.com. Welcome to our free webinar training session for this month on the topic of the power of focus. I am so excited to be sharing this topic with you because I've just got tons of great information to go over. So before I jump into everything, just a quick video and audio check. If you can hear me and see me, I would really appreciate it if you type the word yes into the chat menu. That tells me that I'm not talking to myself, and I always appreciate that. I see lots of people saying hello and where you're from, so that's fantastic. I love seeing all of these different states and cities from around the country and around the world. I see lots of yeses. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so happy to have you. I want to make sure also that you know we do have a handout for today's session. I put the link in the chat menu. It's now going to be right up at the very top because it was the first link in there. So if you don't have the handout, you can just click on that and it'll take you to it. It is a downloadable, printable PDF that you can fill in the blanks as we go, or you can just take notes on your own. That's perfectly fine too. I mentioned very quickly earlier that I've got a lot to go over, so we're going to jump into things. But before I do, I also want to let you know that if you're interested in sticking around at the end of today's session, I'm going to spend maybe like 5 to 10 minutes giving you an update if you're interested on what to expect next year from eatyourcareer.com. I have my kind of strategic business plan put together, and I wanted to just let you know if you attend these training sessions regularly, I just wanted to give you an update on that. There's some pretty cool things that are coming up. So stick around at the end of today's session if you're interested. All right, with that, we're jumping into our topic because we're talking about focus today. And I've mentioned before in past sessions that I love to teach on things that I myself want to improve upon. And I've taught many, many times in the past on the topic of focus. And it's one that I personally can never get enough of. I always have room for improvement in this area. So I thought it was a good time to go ahead and bring this topic back up again and just remind myself of how important it is for me, especially as we're entering the last part of the year when life gets crazy and distractions come out of everywhere. So hopefully what we talk about today, you can implement right away. Especially as we move into this crazy time of year. All right, thanks to everybody who is in chat and helping to troubleshoot for those people who can't get into today's session or are having trouble. I so appreciate when you do that. And just as a little sneak peek of the things I'm going to talk about at the end of today's session with the resource library, we're moving to GoToWebinar, and I'm so excited. So we will not have these kinds of technological issues in the future. So that's just something to look forward to. Yay, I can't wait. Starts next month. So lots that's going to be happening around here. All right, so let's jump into talking about focus. You'll see at the very top of your handout, it says, we are living and working in the age of information, and information is crossed out. And it says distraction, because that's really what it is. Yes, this is the age of information. You've probably heard a million times before that we consume more information in one single day than our ancestors consumed in their entire lives. And that's absolutely true. We have the world's greatest informational resource at our fingertips, and that is the internet. So I do want to share with you, I've got a couple of statistics that I think are just really fascinating around how much information we are creating each day. One quote comes from a gentleman named Eric Schmidt, and he is the executive chairman of Alphabet Inc., which is the parent company of Google. So I feel like he knows what he's talking about in this realm. And he says, every 2 days, we now create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization until 2003. So that's what happens every 2 days now. There are 2 million blog posts that are published every single day. A new blog is set up every half second. and 864,000 hours of video is uploaded to YouTube each day. So come on, you guys. This is crazy. We have so much information coming at us from all directions. We have more information and we have more ways to access it, right? We have our social media interactions, we have webinars, we have videos, we have text messages, we have our handheld devices, we have our iPads, we have our laptops that we can take with us anywhere. We have instant messenger. There are so many ways for us to interact with information and gather information and share information. But these things all create distraction. And they also create more work for us, which I think is really interesting because I think we all want to believe that this new world we live in is supposed to make our lives easier and is supposed to kind of offload work to technology. And I've always kind of wondered, like, why don't I feel that? Why don't I feel like technology takes over part of my work and really helps me? I feel like it adds to my plate. And so I'm reading this great book and I thought I would share with you a quote from it. So here's the book. Hopefully it shows up the right way for you. It says, it's The Organized Mind. That's the name of it. The Organized Mind by Daniel Levitin. And the subtitle is Thinking Straight in the Age of Information Overload. So there you go. It's a great book for me to be reading right now. And I want to share with you a really quick quote from this book. He says, 30 years ago, travel agents made our airline reservations and sales clerks helped us find what we were looking for in stores. Now we do these things ourselves. The information age has offloaded a great deal of the work previously done by people we would call information specialists onto the rest of us. And I think that's really true. That is a great example of how all of this technology and information, even though like in theory it makes our lives easier, it adds to our plate because now we have to go in and we have to look at all of the different airline sites and comparison our travel planning. You know, we're no longer just picking up the phone and talking to our travel agent and having them do all this work. We do it because it's at our fingertips. Now, when we want to go buy a new car, we are no longer going to the one centralized place for consumer information that was available 20, 30 years ago. Now we've got millions of sources for consumer information. We've got reviews that we can read. There's so much more available to us. And sometimes that's a good thing, but it's a really bad thing for our focus. It adds to this distraction that we're constantly surrounded by. So one of the primary reasons that we give in to the many distractions that are all around us with all this information is because of fear. And I know that sounds really strange right now, but there's 4 different types of fears that I want to share with you. And I think when I share these, you'll understand what I mean by fear really causing you to get pulled in by distractions. So this is your first fill out on page 1 of your handout. The primary reasons we succumb to distractions is fear. And number 1 is fear of missing out. You've probably heard of this before. Fear of missing out, or FOMO, as it's sometimes referred to. It's that feeling you get when you feel like all of my friends are hanging out and I wasn't invited. That's that feeling of fear of missing out. In the workplace, it's when you suddenly realize everyone who sits around you was all invited to a meeting and you're not a part of that meeting. And your mind starts to go crazy with what you're missing by not being a part of that meeting. Even though that meeting might not have anything to do with anything that concerns you, you still feel like you're missing out on it. And so we give into distractions, things like social media, things like checking our email all the time, checking every time that we hear our text message ding go off on our phone. We give into those things because we don't want to miss out. We don't want to be left out of things. So that's your first fear, fear of missing out. Fear number 2 is ignorance, fear of ignorance. Fear of ignorance. So think about it like this. we have that feeling that we want to be informed because so much information is at our fingertips. We always want to be informed. And we worry that other people know things that we don't know that we should know. So, for example, there was a big company-wide email that talks about this huge thing that's going on in the business, and you didn't see the email. The email fell through the cracks. You are now ignorant about that particular topic. Or everyone at a meeting is talking about something that's going on in the industry, and you're ignorant because you didn't read that industry newsletter. So that's what I mean by fear of ignorance. We give in to looking at all of these different things because we don't want to be ignorant. Number 3 is urgency. Urgency. We give in to distractions because we feel like everything is urgent. These days, there's an immediacy to everything. If you don't get a return email in 24 hours or less, most people now are like checking back in. Hey, did you get my email? If you don't get a phone call back the same day, hey, did you get my phone call? Is your phone not working? There is an immediacy to everything. And we feel like we have to constantly be connected to our email, connected to our phones, everything, so that we can immediately respond to absolutely everything. And sometimes that's just not realistic and it's not necessary. Earlier I was having a conversation with some folks, and I'm getting ready to go out of town tomorrow. So I let these people know I'm probably not going to get some materials back to you until next week when I get back into town. And I felt so horrible because I want to return things, same day, next day. And they were like, hey, that's no problem. That's fine. So sometimes I think we place that sense of urgency on ourselves, and that is what's driving our distractibility. But really, we should take a step back and ask ourselves, is this real urgency or is it make-believe? Is it something that's in my head? And then the 4th fear is disconnection. Disconnection. So we fear disconnection. We're more connected than ever these days through technology, but we all can still feel disconnected. And so we take part in all of these different things. We allow ourselves to be pulled in all of these different directions to have that sense of connection to people around us. I chose several years ago to stop really doing Facebook for any personal use at all. I sometimes use it for business, but not much. Those of you who follow Eat Your Career over there. But anytime I get on Facebook, I do feel a sense of disconnection, and I do feel a sense of, gee, I wish I was a little more like into this, because I've got old friends from high school and college that all interact, and they're still, really in contact with one another on there. And I'm just kind of on the outskirts, like, hi, I drop in every once in a while. So when we choose not to allow ourselves to be distracted by some things, we end up feeling a little bit disconnected from them. And that's just a trade-off that we have to make and decide if that's something that's acceptable for us. So those are the 4 fears that typically drive us to distractibility. I'm going to pause for 1 minute and just make sure, checking in on questions in the chat menu. I figured a few people would probably want me to repeat it, so I'm going to repeat the name of the book that I was talking about. It's called The Organized Mind. I feel like this is showing up backwards for you guys on your screen. I'm not sure if it is, but it's called The Organized Mind by Daniel Levitin, Levitin. The Organized Mind. And I'm really enjoying it so far. Thanks to everybody who is sharing your answers on the handouts. That's great for people who come in late or have to run to the restroom or something halfway through the session. Okay, so let's move on to the next box, which talks about multitasking. So the reason why I'm talking about multitasking is that what happens is that we feel these fears, and we've got all of this information around us and all these things causing distraction. And so with that fear, it creates an addiction. And that addiction is relieved by giving in to distraction. So we have a fear of missing out. We have a fear of being disconnected or ignorant. And so we give in to distraction. We check our email. We pick up the phone every single time that it rings. We never let it go to voicemail. We're checking our text messages all the time. We're constantly refreshing Facebook. We're doing those things because those things alleviate our fear. They give us a moment of relief. And that moment of relief is like an affirmative hit. It is like a drug user taking a hit and getting that feeling of like, oh yeah, so that's what's happening for us when we're checking our phone and we're checking our email. We're in this cycle of addiction. And one of the ways that we manage that addiction is that we try to multitask. We try to do really everything at once, like get as many things done at any given moment as we possibly can. And multitasking has been proven over and over and over and over and over again that it really is not helpful in so many ways. So I just want to share with you 7 things that happen when you try to multitask, because I want to convince you that even though we've all been taught multitasking is the thing, right? It's the buzzword and everybody has to be great at multitasking. Even though we've been taught that, it is not true. There has been so much research done around this, and there's a lot of negative impacts that come when we try to multitask. So you have a big box here for filling in the blank on these 7 things that happen when you multitask. Number 1, it decreases productivity. It decreases productivity. And there was a Stanford University study on this that showed that multitasking actually decreases productivity by 40% or more. That is significant, 40% or more. So that was a Stanford University study. This stuff is all backed up by studies that have been done with people who are truly trying to multitask. The second thing that happens when you multitask is it lowers performance. It lowers performance. So it decreases your productivity, so you're getting less done, and it's lowering your performance. You're doing things less well. You're not performing as well as you could. This is a study from the Psychonomic Bulletin and Review in 2010. This is where the study was published. It shows that only 2.5% of the population can multitask without performing worse on either task. So the rest of us, the other, 97.5% of us, we all are going to perform worse on one or both tasks. There's only a very small percentage of the population who can allow their brain to be pulled in different directions at once without harming how they're performing. The third thing that happens when you multitask is it lowers your IQ. This one is scary. It lowers your IQ. So IQ is a measure of traditional intelligence. Here's the study that was done on this one. Oh, it's so fascinating and really scary. So this was done at the University of London, and it found that participants who multitasked during cognitive tasks, so tasks that require some brain power, they experienced IQ score declines that were similar to what you'd expect if they had smoked marijuana or stayed up all night. That's crazy. And then it says IQ drops of 15 points for multitasking men lowered their scores to the average range of an 8-year-old child. So there you have it. When we're multitasking, we might as well, have stayed up all night, and how good you are when you pull an all-nighter, right? You're probably not thinking too clearly. It's comparing us to, people who are under the influence and basically 8-year-old children. So it's not helpful for our productivity, our performance, or our basic intelligence. All right, number 4 is that it lowers your emotional intelligence, which is known as EQ. So we've got IQ, which is traditional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is EQ. And multitasking decreases your ability to be emotionally intelligent. So emotional intelligence is all about understanding your own emotions and understanding the emotions of other people. and responding appropriately to those emotions. So if you think about multitasking while you're sitting with a loved one at dinner and you're flipping through your phone, you're probably not going to be emotionally connected with your significant other. And if they're telling you they've had a stressful day, you're probably not going to pick up on their emotional cues that they need some comfort, that they need some reassurance. So emotional intelligence clearly is going to go down when you're multitasking. Multitasking also, it reduces your creativity. So that's number 5. It reduces your creativity. And number 6 is that it limits your decision-making ability. So it decreases your creativity and it limits your decision-making ability. So these are 2 things that require cognitive space in your mind to be creative, to make intelligent decisions. We've probably all experienced a time when we were driving and talking on the phone. So here in Colorado, we can legally talk on the phone and drive at the same time. I even have, the speaker that comes through my car speakers, so I can just talk and both hands on the wheel and I'm driving. But I'm still multitasking. I'm engaging mentally in a conversation with someone and trying to drive at the same time. And I've definitely experienced this. I'm sure you have too, where you get so engaged in that conversation, you drive to the wrong place, right? You drive to where your automatic pilot takes you and suddenly you go, wait a second, I was going to the grocery store. How did I end up over at the school? This is something that happens. Our decision-making abilities are completely shrunk when we're trying to multitask. I should have made the decision to turn right. And instead I turned left because I was on autopilot. So that's just one example. It reduces creativity, limits decision-making ability. And then finally, number 7 is that it decreases your memory. It decreases your memory. You think about these kids these days, that they are so distracted by all of these things happening around them. My boyfriend has 2 teenage daughters. They are constantly on their phones, and they'll be on their phones. They'll be on FaceTime with a friend. They'll be cooking macaroni and cheese and having a conversation with me. All of these things at the same time. They aren't retaining anything. That's what happens. It decreases your memory because memory requires cognitive engagement. In order for something to solidify in your mind, you have to be cognitively engaged. And when you're distributing your attention across all of these different places, everything remains at a surface level. Nothing gets truly ingrained. So while I might be having a conversation with the teenage daughter making macaroni and cheese and talking on FaceTime to her friend and checking social media, she's not going to remember that conversation. I'm sure those of you with kids, especially teenagers, are familiar with this. So that's just, again, it's another, just one example of what I mean by this. But there's a lot of negative impacts here. So those are just 7. I've put a link to the source material for those 7 items that I just listed there in case you're interested in reading that article a little more extensively. The article also has links to all the different studies that I talked about. All right, let's move on to the second page of your handout. And I want to talk about some important definitions here because I have been talking about multitasking. Here's what's important to know. There's different types of multitasking. So I've defined them for you at the top of page 2 of your handout. Switch tasking is typically what happens when people are multitasking. They aren't really splitting their attention between 2 different tasks at the same time. What they're really doing is they're rapidly switching back and forth from one task to the other. And they call that multitasking. But it's really switch tasking. And switch tasking is really dangerous because you're never getting fully engrossed and mentally engaged in something. You're just working on it for a minute and pulling your attention over here and then going back over here. So you're constantly having to re-engage with the material on either side. You're constantly having to get back up to speed. You're never really getting in flow with anything because you're bouncing around so much. This happens all the time in the workplace. So switch tasking, we really want to avoid. That is the negative type of multitasking. Background tasking is another type, and this one actually works pretty well. Background tasking is when you're performing 2 tasks simultaneously when one or both do not require mental attention. So the example I always refer to is when I clean my house and I listen to an audiobook. It's like my favorite thing to do. That's background tasking. I'm doing two tasks that really don't require much mental engagement. I can do them both at the same time without really harming my performance on either. I can, wipe the counters and listen to my audiobook. And if I get really engrossed in my audiobook, I might not wipe my counters as perfectly as I would otherwise, but it's okay. There's no harm done. Same thing the other direction. If I focus totally on the counters and I kind of zone out to listening to my audiobook, no harm done. I can probably keep going and catch up. So background tasking is really with things that there's not too much consequence if your performance is decreased on one or both. Because cognitively, you will kind of switch back and forth between the two things. But if neither one really requires a huge amount of mental attention, it's okay. It's good to do. It's an effective use of your time. So that's important to just remember whenever we're talking about multitasking. We're not talking about that kind of background tasking that is effective. We're really talking about the switch tasking sort of behavior. All right. Thanks to those of you who are adding questions to the chat menu. I am seeing them. They're catching my eye, and I'll make sure I get to them before the end of today's session. Let's talk about the elements of focus. So the elements of focus are right there towards the middle of your page on the second page of your handout. There's 4 elements here. So the first element is single tasking. In order to have focus, we have to be doing one thing. We can't be trying to split our attention, and we can't be trying to do switch tasking, going quickly back and forth. We need to have one task in front of us, and we call that single tasking. I know it's silly to have a whole word, about it. It's just doing one thing at one time, but it's the opposite of multitasking, single tasking. The second element for focus is deep engagement. Deep engagement. That means that your brain is actively involved. So deep engagement. The third element of focus is concentrated attention. So concentrated attention. You are attentive. You are engaged with the material. You're not allowing the things around you to pull your attention away. Concentrated attention. That was number 3. And number 4 is absorption in the moment. Absorption in the moment. When you're really focused, you get absorbed in the moment. You end up in a state of flow. You've probably experienced that before when you've been working on something at work and you're really deeply involved in it. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're like, wow, it's 5:30. How did that happen? That's flow. That's because you were focusing, you were absorbed in the moment. You had concentrated attention. You were truly engaged with what you were doing. That's what focus is all about. That's what we are trying to achieve in the workplace for those items that really require deep focus. Not everything does, as we've talked about before with this idea of background tasking. Not everything requires that deep level of focus, but the things that do, we need to give it and we need to practice this. So we are going to talk about how to improve your ability to focus, but I also want to just quickly touch on what's in the box here in the middle of the page. It says attention hijacking happens when we are attempting to focus and we get derailed by distractions. Deliberate drifting is when we allow ourselves to productively flow with our natural train of thought. We must allow ourselves intentionally to engage in the latter at appropriate times. This is a big deal. So attention hijacking is when you have something very important that you need to be concentrating on and the phone keeps ringing and you can't get into a state of flow with this important task over here because that phone keeps on ringing. That is attention hijacking. That is something that we would need to manage, that distraction, so we can focus on the appropriate thing at the appropriate time. But there's this other thing called deliberate drifting, which is very important. where you are thinking creatively and you're saying, I'm just going to go where my thoughts take me and see what happens. It's a great thing to think of, when you're driving. A lot of us get really creative when we're driving, and your brain just kind of flows and you follow its natural train of thought, and you suddenly get to work and you're like, oh, I've got a great idea of something I want to make sure I talk to my boss about today. That's deliberate drifting. You allow yourself to do that. I love deliberate drifting. I think about it every single time I go for a massage. I love massage, as I've talked about before. It's like my guilty pleasure. It's such a wonderful luxury. And I always think of it as my time for deliberate drifting, because my mind just wanders and I think creatively, and it can be a very inspiring, relaxing hour. So it's important to recognize that not every single moment of the day should be concentrated attention. There are times when deliberately allowing yourself to drift is very productive. All right, we are going to talk about improving focus. And before we do that, I want to note the 3 bullet points here at the bottom of page 2. There's a typo in bullet point number 1. And excuse me for 1 minute, I just need to wipe my nose. I'm starting to get a cold, so forgive me. Bullet point number 1, there's a typo, and it should read the brain. So the word brain is missing there. Hello. That's kind of ironic, isn't it? The brain naturally tries to preserve energy by going on autopilot. The brain naturally tries to preserve energy by going on autopilot. I think that's what my brain was doing when I was typing these notes. It's very funny. Okay, so the brain tries to preserve energy by going on autopilot. If you think about it, if we had to concentrate in order to do everything during the day, we would be exhausted by the end of the day. If I had to concentrate, okay, get up out of bed in the morning. Okay, concentrate on lifting my body and concentrate on putting my feet on the floor, and then concentrate on walking towards the coffee maker. And how do I make coffee again? Oh yes, I've got to concentrate to do. If we had to do that, you'd be exhausted by 10 o'clock in the morning. So our brain is putting us on autopilot for a good portion of the day because that's helpful. That's how we reserve our energy for the things that we should be concentrating on. The second bullet point says the process of improving focus requires concentrated effort and energy. So you have to concentrate to concentrate. You have to focus on this idea of, I want to enhance my ability to focus. This is something that I want to exert effort on because it is an effort. And then the third bullet point is that focus is a learned skill that requires practice and repetition. And we have forgotten, just collectively as a society, we've forgotten how to engage this skill. And we've stopped practicing it on a regular basis the way our ancestors did. So we have to make the conscious choice to practice this skill and try to use it on a regular basis so that we can enhance our abilities to focus. All right, let's go to our next page here. This is page 3 of your handout. And page 3 starts with a little diagram at the top. So we're going to fill in the blanks on the diagram. And this diagram represents a predictable pattern that happens frequently in the workplace. It also happens outside of the workplace, but we're mainly talking about how it happens at work. So the 3 boxes up at the top, from left to right, should read focus, drift, refocus. So the arrows, focus is where it starts, and then you drift, and then you refocus. This is the common pattern for human beings. We try to focus on something, and then we realize suddenly our mind is somewhere completely different. Then we go, oh yeah, I'm focusing over here. That's the predictable pattern. Focus, drift, refocus. You'll notice that there's a little arrow pointing down underneath drift, and then there's a box. So fill in that box to say the word trigger. Trigger. there is something that triggers you to drift. You might not even realize what that trigger is. You're reading a book and there's a word that just creates a mental association for you, and that mental association carries you off to a different place. And now you're mentally thinking about all of these things that happened to you yesterday because that one single word that you read. That's a trigger. In the workplace, we have all kinds of triggers that pull us into that drifting mode. So we could be trying to focus on something, and a trigger could be something as simple as the phone ringing, a pop-up email, somebody coming over to your desk and interrupting you with a question. Those things all can inspire you to drift. And then you have to refocus. And the process of refocusing takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of mental energy. So as much as possible, we want to recognize at those times when we really need to be focusing, we want to recognize what our triggers are and how we can stop those triggers from coming in. Because if we can stop those triggers, we can reduce the number of times that we drift and the number of times that we have to refocus. If we can minimize the triggers, we can remain focused for a longer stretch of time before we drift. So this is the goal. Let's talk about strategies for improvement. We've got 6 here. They're fill in the blank. I know there's a lot of fill in the blanks on the handout. I'd love to know if you guys like that. If you don't like it, if it's too much to keep up with, if I go too fast, if I go too slow, feedback is fantastic. Okay, let's talk about strategies for improvement. Strategy number 1 is manage technology. Your fill in the blank is technology. Clearly, technology is a big source of triggers. You know, I've mentioned several different types of triggers that happen through technology. And we forget that we are the ones who control technology. We get to make choices about how technology interrupts us. And all that is just going into your settings 9 times out of 10, you know, but you get to say, if you don't want the email pop-ups, if you don't want the dings, if you don't want the little icon at your bottom right-hand corner that tells you you have a new email because it's a trigger. You get to say, if you want your phone to go directly to voicemail for a little while. Those things are acceptable when you need to focus. They're all triggers. And if you can reduce those triggers, you can focus for longer before you start to drift. So actively manage your technology. Make some smart choices for yourself. I've seen people before where they have set up, you know, an autoresponder, like an out of office autoresponder on their email. When they know they're going to be focused on a task for 2 or 3 hours during the day, they'll just set up an autoresponder from 12 to 3. I won't be available. I'll get back to you after 3 p.m. You know, wonderful way to calm people down, you know, because of that sense of urgency. You calm them down and you let them know, I'm not going to be distracted from 12 to 3. So you can set things up like that. You know, I know that there's certain limitations given your position. You might not always be able to do these things. And I'm not suggesting always do any of these things. You have to make the correct decisions. The idea here is that you're able to focus on the right things at the right times. Not everything requires an intense level of deep focus, but those things that do, you have to recognize when it's the right time to focus on them and then reduce your triggers as much as possible. Take some initiative to use some of these strategies, even if they're uncomfortable at first. It might mean retraining the people around you. So manage technology is number 1. Number 2 is manage people. Manage people. People are huge distractors. They are definitely triggers for a lot of people. They can pull you out of your focus and cause you to drift. And the only way that we can manage people is through our words. You know, we have to be clear in our communication. And if we need to be focusing on something, if we are on deadline, we need to ask people to come back at another time. We need to let people know, I'll be wrapped up at 3 and I'll come find you. I'll give you a call as soon as I'm done with this. You know, actively managing interruptions is not a bad thing. I think a lot of us have been taught that we have to accept every interruption in the moment that it happens. Sometimes it is perfectly acceptable to say, I acknowledge that I'm hearing your request right now. I recognize that you need my attention, and I will get back to you as soon as my attention is available. It's a form of prioritizing, and it's a form of respecting your own time. So managing people using clear language is the only way to get people to understand when really you don't want to be interrupted. Reduce noise. Reduce noise is number 3. Noise is a huge distraction, and especially with our open workspaces these days. So reducing noise as best you can for yourself will help to prevent drift. So, I used to work in an open workspace, and if I could hear a conversation over on the other side of my little cubicle wall, I'd be wanting to engage in that conversation. I'd have an opinion to share. Sometimes I'd just chime in. I'm not even involved in the conversation. I'm supposed to be focusing over here, but I'm hearing it and it pulls my attention. So if you can reduce your noise that's around you by doing things like wearing headphones, that can be a useful way to reduce your triggers. It's also okay, and I know people have a hard time with this, but it's also okay to ask people to keep their voices down. I know it's hard, but you can do it. Just politely requesting with a smile, I'm so sorry to ask you to do this, but can you just keep your voice down for about 30 minutes and trying to concentrate on something? Most people will be really respectful. And especially in an open work environment, they might have to ask you to do that one day. So if you're respectful to them, they'll be respectful to you. It might be worth trying in those moments when you need it. Again, this is not all the time. Number 4, reduce clutter. Reduce clutter. Physical clutter creates mental clutter. All sorts of studies have been done on this. But when you have things that are all around you, they can pull at your attention. So for example, if you had a folder that was an upcoming project, and you're like, well, I don't want to forget about this upcoming project, so I'm going to put this folder right here on my desk to remind me, because it's very important. Every time you look at your desk, you're going to see that folder, and it's going to immediately pull your focus in a different direction. So I know out of sight, out of mind is typically thought of as a bad thing, but in this case, it's not. You need to put that folder away if it's something that's pulling at your attention. Even clutter, things like, souvenirs from your last vacation. Sometimes those things are nice to have around because they're really comforting. But if you're looking at a souvenir and suddenly you're back on vacation, you're thinking about it and your brain, you're there, it can be a distraction. So just look around and see what kind of clutter might be creating mental clutter for you. Number 5 is practice time blocking. Time blocking. Very, sophisticated term for a very simple concept. Time blocking is blocking time on your calendar. So when you need to concentrate on something, block time on your calendar to work on it. Research shows that when you actually set an appointment with yourself, you're more likely to keep it. You're more likely to actually go and put your attention on that one thing that you've dedicated time for. In the workplace, it also shows other people that you're busy during that period of time. So you have been committed during that period of time to focusing on a specific item. So it is worthwhile to go through and just time block off for any important item that does require your focused attention. Block the time on the calendar, and that's going to be an indicator to other people not to interrupt you. It's a reminder to you this is focused time. You might even want to, take yourself away from your typical open workspace area. Go, reserve yourself a conference room so you can sit it where you won't be distracted to work on that project for an hour. And finally, number 6 is get more sleep. Get more sleep. In order to be able to focus and concentrate, your brain has to be well rested. It's just like when we talked about with multitasking that it decreases your IQ to a point where it was like you hadn't slept the night before. When you don't sleep, when you don't get a full night's sleep, your brain is functioning at a lower capacity. So you don't have the ability to concentrate as easily. The research tells us that anywhere from 7 to 9 hours a night is what a healthy adult needs in order to be fully functioning mentally and physically the next day. And that's 7 to 9 hours every night consistently. You can't, be sleep deprived during the week and then make up for that on the weekend and expect that you're going to even out somewhere along the line. That's not how brain functionality works. You've got to have consistent rest in order to wake up rejuvenated to be able to concentrate well the next day. So those are my recommendations. I've seen lots of questions that I do want to make sure I get to. So I'm going to hit on the last couple of points here. This study that was published that talks about on the bottom of page 3, a study published by the Harvard Business Review found that people spend about 47% of waking hours mentally wandering. They're thinking about things that aren't happening rather than thinking about what's actually happening in the present moment. And what the study found is that this was a great contributor to unhappiness. We all have been learning this a lot in the past few years, that happiness is all about being in the now and being in the present moment. That's what focus is about. So when we can focus and when we can really put concentration into something, we tend to feel more content. We tend to feel happier with the work that we're doing. So sometimes you'll hear people say, I can't focus at work because I don't like my work. Well, if you practice focusing, you might like your work a little bit more. So it's this interesting kind of cycle that can happen. Instead of telling yourself, I can't focus because I'm not happy, maybe you're not happy because you're not focusing. So give that a shot. Try and use some of these principles and see how that goes. See if you actually start to enjoy what you're doing a little bit more. The last page, I just put some information about my book, The Proactive Professional, because I personally am a big fan of this book, clearly, but The Proactive Professional, I did a lot of research about focus for it because focus is a big piece of being proactive. Being proactive is all about doing the right things today to set yourself up for tomorrow. And, we have to be able to focus on, okay, well, what's happening today? And we have to also focus on what's happening tomorrow and make the right moves, strategically have some foresight to make the right moves so we're successful tomorrow. So it leads me to a question that someone had sent in through email before today's session. And this person says, can focusing result in closed thinking? So you're not able to see the perspectives of other people around you. And the answer to that is yes. There is a point when you can focus so much on yourself and what you're doing that you go blind to the rest of the world. And that's something I talk about in The Proactive Professional. So we have to delicately balance focused attention on what's right in front of us with that attention on what's happening tomorrow, next week, next month, and what's happening around us. Social awareness. What is happening with other people? How are they feeling? How are they interacting? What are they working on? It's a complicated thought process. It requires, multidimensional thinking, but that is sort of the pinnacle of what we want to get to. When we think about being focused, we want to have that kind of cognitive flexibility where we're able to focus, but we're not shutting out the rest of the world around us. And again, this is something that I talk about a lot. If you are interested in The Proactive Professional and you don't have it yet, I've put a discount code for you to get $3 off. So that's the last page of your handout. It just tells you that discount code and the link where to buy it. You do have to buy it from the Create Space site. If you go to Amazon, you're not going to get the $3 off, but you're welcome to buy it from Amazon as well. That's perfectly fine. But the discount code is for the Create Space link on the handout. So I hope you'll pick that up if you're interested in this topic and some of the other things that I've done around focus and how to use that in the workplace in order to be proactive and anticipate needs and set yourself up for success. All right. I can't wait to get into all these questions. I've seen a lot coming through. So I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and just see who asked questions first. Okay. Our first question says, since multitasking or being a multitasker is something that is commonly seen or placed on resumes, do potential employers cringe when they see it? What term would you recommend instead? I think that the research is probably still being disseminated. I think there's probably some employers that, yes, they cringe when they see it because they're so aware of this. They've heard this so many times that multitasking isn't great. It's not good for your productivity or your performance. It's a buzzword. It doesn't, it's really switch tasking, which is not great. So some probably cringe. A better word, in my opinion, would be prioritization. I think prioritizing is much more important than multitasking. Being able to understand what's most important and what should be done first, and then efficiently and effectively executing, that is much more compelling to me. That's what I help train, particularly administrative professionals. I know I have a lot of admins who join these sessions. That's what I focus on, is understanding priorities and then effectively and efficiently knowing where to place your attention when and executing on them quickly. Next question here. How would you answer someone when they ask you how you multitask? So if you're talking about in sort of like a job interview situation, they may actually be kind of getting to this point about, switch tasking. So if someone were to ask me that in a job interview, I would use it as a great opportunity to explain that, well, here's what I understand about some of the research, and how I multitask is I try to effectively use my time with background tasking, and you can explain some of the types of things that you do, where maybe you can be doing some professional development learning while you're doing filing, those types of things. But primarily what I like to focus on is prioritization and learning the skill of rapid refocus, being able to focus effectively on the appropriate task at hand fully, and then quickly focusing on the next appropriate task at hand and understanding what comes first, what's most important. That's the language I would use in a job interview if you were ever asked that question. So it would also depend, I think, on your role and the type of multitasking that might be expected. If you are someone who works on the phone with clients a lot, you've got a client on the phone, you need to look up their account while they're speaking to you. That's multitasking, and it is kind of like a requirement for the role. But you recognize that when you're typing into the computer, you're probably not effectively hearing what that client is saying. So you may say to the client, excuse me for a minute, I'm just going to pause for a minute and get your information up on the screen. So you're not allowing them to carry on speaking and telling you important information while you're missing it because you're typing into the computer. So it depends on your role and how you might use this information in a question like that. Next question says, as an AA, so that's an administrative assistant, how can you avoid switch tasking, as that is often part of the job, switching from a task you're working on to assist someone who needs your immediate attention and then back to yours? So again, I would really be clear about what needs your focus, devoted attention. And in those moments, asking yourself, is this something that is a higher priority that should pull my attention away from this task? If it is, you're making an appropriate decision to move and focus on this person who needs your immediate attention. If that's not the right priority, though, if the thing you should be concentrating on right now is your appropriate priority, you should be saying to the person, I'll get back to you in about 30 minutes. I'm going to be at your desk. I'm going to finish this up first. You are prioritizing effectively at that point. And, not everyone loves hearing that. When I was an executive assistant, I primarily supported one senior executive as well as his partners. And I could say that type of thing to his partners, but I probably wouldn't say that to him. He's my primary. So it depends on who the person is, what your relationship is with them, and what the request is. The next question says, as admins, we are customer service. How do we ask for time and space to focus? It's all about understanding the priority. I'm sorry to keep hitting that nail on the head. But if it is something that it is your priority and you need the time to focus on that, then that should be something that should be discussed in terms of prioritization. If that is something that has a deadline associated with it, if there's big consequences, if you don't have the time to concentrate on it, those things should be discussed so that you can then feel comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to close my door. I'm going to go to a conference room. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get this, chunk of time when I'm not interrupted. Next question here. This is going to be good, I can tell. So during this webinar, my boss walked in to talk to me about scheduling a meeting. I had to make an update to our website because our web guy is out, and someone else just tried to talk to me and had to shut him down. Is improving focus a realistic goal? So it's a good question. And here's what I would say you were doing. You were background tasking. You put me in the background so you could focus on higher priorities. That's okay. So no, focus is not a realistic goal to focus on absolutely everything. The goal is to focus on the things that need focus, the priorities. And it's great that you were able to background task this webinar. You keep your earbuds in, you go, you make an update on the website. Cool. You were background tasking, you were getting some of the information, probably not all of it. And you were taking care of that high priority thing. Now, if you were just learning how to work in the website and it needed your concentration, you might have had to turn me off. You might have had to say, you know what? I can't background task Chrissy anymore because I need all of my attention on this website because I'm not comfortable working in it. That's understanding your priorities. It's understanding, the level of comfort that you have with things and what rightfully needs your attention at the right time. So I think improving focus is a realistic goal, but not for everything. In today's workplace, we do have to do things like background tasking, and we do have to rapidly refocus on the right things at the right time. And there are times when we need deep focus, and allowing ourselves that and advocating for ourselves to have that is important. I see lots of great comments. I can't wait to go back and read them after today's session, but I do want to make sure I get to at least one more question. This one says, how do you handle distractions of someone in an open floor plan when he or she is coughing, sneezing, or blowing their nose and headphones don't work? We have to be understanding of humans. That's my, I know it's not probably what you want to hear, but, we do work with other people and people do get sick. I've been annoyed to death by someone coughing on the other side of a cubicle wall. I understand. We can't ask them to change their behavior, and we can do everything that we can. Noise canceling headphones can do wonders. A fan, I used to always have a fan on even when it wasn't hot because the whir of the fan was very comforting to me, and it made me drown out other noises. Just an idea. Okay. I am going to try to do one more question. Please stick around, especially if you want to hear the updates on the Career Resource Library for 2018. I'll share those with you as soon as I'm done with this one last question. This person says, sometimes my day goes sideways and I find it difficult to focus due to staff restructuring, abrupt new initiatives, and personal issues, colleagues losing a loved one. How do we rise above the drama? I think that we all have so much at any given point in time. And, I know what you mean. We all have our personal lives. The people we work with have personal lives. And I try to, when I come to work, that is my time I want to focus, and I want to focus on work. And that is it's a comforting thing for me to not have my personal life like hugely a component of something that is spoken about in the workplace. So, you still want to be comforting to your colleagues, who are going through things, obviously. But rising above and being able to focus when there's a lot going on around you, I think it's the same principles. And it's deciding, where your focus really is needed, making sure you're prioritizing correctly, and using those same practices. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't have anything like any wise words of wisdom for you that would be any different from what we've talked about. But I recommend, all of these books that I've mentioned, The Organized Mind, The Proactive Professional, my book. There's another one called Focus by Daniel Goleman. And that might be a great one for the person who just asked that question, Heidi. Daniel Goleman wrote the book called Emotional Intelligence. So he's like the founder of this concept of emotional intelligence. And he wrote a book called Focus. And so some of the things we talked about today did come from that book, I'm sure. I read it a while ago. But he'd probably be a great source because his main focus is around emotional intelligence. And how do we remain emotionally intelligent to ourselves and to others, while also focusing on the things we need to focus on. So maybe give that a try. All right. I am going to let those of you who need to go. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. And for those of you who want to stay, let's talk about what's coming up in 2018. So I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that we are going to go to webinar. It's a fantastic platform. Webinar Jam has been a technological difficulty for a year now, and we're no longer going to deal with it. We're going to the best platform on the market, GoToWebinar. So stay tuned because there's going to be some changes. It's no longer an auto-subscribe system. So when you want to join a free training session or the Q&As, that I do, you have to register for them. You have to go in and put your name and email address for the system to send you the webinar details. I'm sorry, but it's just the way the system works. I'll send out an email to remind everybody about that. But it's just a consequence of moving to a much better platform. I can't reiterate that enough. The video quality, it's going to be night and day. I promise you, it's going to be so much better. So please do, do register for those sessions that you want to attend. We're still going to do free monthly trainings, free monthly Q&A, Ask the Career Coach. So GoToWebinar, better system. The big thing with GoToWebinar is that it's also one of the most expensive platforms that's out there on the market. So here's the deal. What's going to be happening in 2018? I felt that GoToWebinar was an absolute requirement for me to feel comfortable continuing to do webinars. I don't like having to deal with technological frustrations. So I'm willing to pay for the better platform to make these things continue in 2018. They will be free for live attendance. Every single month, you can come to every single session for free for the live session. If you want the replay, starting next year, the replays are going to be available in the Career Resource Library, which is going to have a nominal fee. $9 a month if you want to see the replays and if you want the stuff in the library. If you don't care about that, if all you want to do is come to the live sessions, fantastic. It's totally free for you. If you do care about that, if you want the replays, $9 a month is pretty reasonable. Those of you who are already part of the library right now, you're going to get it for $5 a month. It's just a discount because I love you. You guys have been here for a year. So that's what's coming up. If you know right now, you're like, Chrissy, yeah, this is great, but I'm not going to pay, $5 a month to be a part of the library. I'll come to the live sessions, but, I don't need that. That's fine. That's totally cool. Go into the library right now and download everything that you want. Okay. It's free right now. Take advantage of it. I'm going to be adding more next year. So there will be more resources in there. But, if you know for sure you're not going to do it, you're not going to, be a paying member, just go grab stuff now. It's all there. And so that's how it's going to work. It's all about, helping to recoup the cost of GoToWebinar. I hope you guys understand that. And I think it'll be well worth it for the better quality. And it is just such a nominal fee. Those of you who want it, I think it's going to be a no-brainer. If you don't want it, that's totally okay. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So let's see here. How long will the replay last? Will it expire? So if you're in the library, if you do the paid library subscription, the replays will be in there for a year. And then I'll probably have to remove them because it'll just be too much data in my website. So they'll be in there for a year. It'll be plenty of time for you to go in and watch it and catch up. $9 is super cheap. Thank you, Summer, for saying that. Totally. So I'm telling you guys, I'm not trying to get rich here. It's hard for me to even do this because I want to do these things for free. But it is what it is. This is a very expensive platform to GoToWebinar, and I want to recoup the cost. That's all I'm trying to do. So yeah, as Summer says, many webinars are $99 or more. Yes, I so appreciate you saying that, Summer. It's true. And if it's something that you guys have gotten benefit out of and you believe you'll get future benefit, I hope you'll take advantage of it. Karen asks, is there a way we could pay a yearly fee to have unlimited access? I'm not going to currently do a yearly fee. It's like $9 a month and it'll just be auto subscription. So you won't have to think about it, which hopefully is great for you. But doing a yearly thing creates a problem for 10 years down the road if it needs to be shut down. If there is some other place where I need to prioritize my attention, I have to wait a year to let all of my memberships expire. So that's getting into too much business nitty-gritty. But the simple answer is it's monthly. Thank you, everyone. So glad that you all are understanding, it sounds like, of what's going to be happening with the library. It is a big adjustment for me mentally and then also physically, like in the electronics of it. So please just keep your eye out for information on the webinar changeover. The auto subscribes are going away, and re-register for sessions you want to be a part of. One question. So Melody says, my company would pay for it, but we cannot do it on auto pay. It's a good point that you make there, Melody. For companies, I can probably figure something out. So I appreciate that you actually asked that question, Melody, because now I need to think about it. And Karen, perhaps that's what you were getting at too. And I do want to make it so that your organizations can support this. So I will have an answer for you next month. I'm still, I guess, hashing out some of these details. Fantastic question. I will find a way to make that work for companies. So I appreciate that you asked it. You guys are so sweet. Thank you for understanding everything. And Christina, you just made my life. She says, Chrissy, you are definitely worth $9 a month. I'm blushing. So thank you, everyone, so much. Yes, and Karen makes a great point. It would be great if organizations could support this sort of thing. Advocate for yourself. $9 a month. You're worth it too. That's what I got to say. All right. I said thank you about 100 times, but thank you once again. I appreciate that you were here today. I hope you got a lot of value out of this session. I will be seeing you again next month for another free session. The month of November, I don't have the topic scheduled yet. I'm headed out of town, and the topic will be scheduled next week. I'll send out an email so that you're aware of that. If you have a great idea for a topic, shoot it on over to me. I'd love to hear and incorporate in your thoughts and your needs. So thanks, everyone. Bye.